Grew up in a house full of books. My earliest memory is of reading. I had a habit of taking a book with me to bed every single day as a kid. Of course, that habit got ruined when cell phones entered my life. I think books are interesting because they don't just reveal who we are, but they carry our own expectations of who we want to be. So a lot of people will buy books that they hope to read one day, and they will never get around to reading them. And the reason they buy these books is because they imagine they are the type of people who would like to enjoy reading those books. I am 100% guilty of this. I do not have my bookshelf to show you this at this point. I'm not in Delhi. I am in Hyderabad. Funny story about that. I was hoping to shoot this video in Delhi, and since then what's happened is I've had to change cities twice. It has been exceptionally exhausting. I thought I would just be in Delhi. I was in Bangalore before, and I thought I'll move to Delhi. But as I was doing that move, I got a job in Hyderabad. So I had to move here, and now I'm slowly sort of settling in. And most of the bookshelves here are completely empty. I'm just going to give myself a little bit of time to fill these out. And let's see how it goes. It's always, I think, we carry parts of ourselves in the books that we have as well. So I took some of my books with me to Bangalore, and then when I realized I'd have to move back to Delhi, I just thought it's not worth the effort of bringing all my books here if I have to move back again. But yeah, I think we carry parts of ourselves in the books that we've read. And it's always nice to have reminders of who I used to be when I read these books. You know, much younger, significantly more stupid. Also someone who could read books with an uninterrupted attention span. God knows it's become so much worse over the years. Yeah, and I think the reason I'm making this video is also to talk about the books that I've loved reading. I don't think I've ever had this kind of conversation with anybody. So I would love to hear what you have to say about these things. I want to know what were your favorite books growing up. I also want to have some relationship with reading and talking about it that's healthy. Because in college, we all sort of talked about books like we're intellectual people who are reading books because we're intellectual people. That's not... Broadly, that's not what I subscribe to anymore. I'm too old for that. And honestly, anybody reading anything at this point is fascinating. Honestly, anybody reading anything that's not AI slop is fascinating at this point. So whatever it is you're reading, let me know. Would love to have a conversation with you. Yeah, we carry parts of ourselves in the books that we've read. And having a physical bookshelf becomes a reminder of all the different selves you've been over the years. The earliest memory I have of reading is this book. It's called The Faraway Tree Stories. It's by Enid Blyton. I think that's how the name is pronounced. This is essentially about kids who, like, there's a tree and they go upwards. Jesus. I need more practice doing this. There's a tree, there's a magic tree, and they climb that tree. On top there's like this doorway into magical worlds. It's really fascinating because they end up going to some really beautiful places. And much later in life, when I was studying literature, I would discover this thing called magical realism, which, you know, for me the antecedents of that was pretty much this. Yeah, completely different traditions of writing though, but you know, for the sake of continuity, that's sort of how my brain interpreted it. That's what meant a lot to me as a child, was that when I started to read, it felt like I could go somewhere different from where I was. I could take a book and I could travel with it. This book is about kids who travel to faraway places with the help of a magic tree. And in a way, that's what books became for me when I was a kid, because I could go to places that I did not have access to in the real world with the help of books. This book is about 3 kids who go to faraway places through this tree, right? And they discover new things and they encounter creatures that they would not have if they just stayed home. And I mostly stayed at home as a kid, and books became the way for me to travel wherever I could. So in a way, the reading of this book became a metaphor for reading itself, and I quite enjoyed traveling with it wherever it took me. Yeah, this one is really close to me. And there's one thing about this book which, now to be honest, I haven't reread this book because I know that it's not going to be as good as I remember it. Yeah, that's a part of growing up. You come to terms with that nothing is ever as good as you remember it. Yeah. But at the same point in time, I do remember what I felt like while I was reading this. And I think that feeling is important. I remember the sense of discovery and wonder I felt as I was going through this book. And in sort of later years, that's what I've tried to recreate in my life as I've explored new passions and new hobbies. So I think this book is sort of foundational for me as a person, because I don't really have a lot of memories from childhood. But this one, I remember reading this. I remember just how amazing it must have been for these kids in the book to travel to all these different places and to discover new things and learn from them and get freaked out and get into trouble and then recover from all of that. So yeah, obviously this is possibly my most favorite childhood book. What else did I read? I read the usual, Annie Blyton had a lot of books that I really liked. Book series actually, not just books. So we had Secret 7, Famous 5. That's a lot of mystery stuff. Oh, speaking of mystery stuff, I did read a lot of Sherlock Holmes as a kid. I think I read pretty much all the stories, but I got bored. The thing with Sherlock Holmes was that all the stories had a very clever scientific explanation for what ended up happening. I think this is especially true of the Hound of the Baskervilles, if I'm not wrong. That had like the most scientific explanation for what happened. But at the same point in time, more than the how of, you know, how the murders get committed, I was more interested in the why. So, I mean, Arthur Conan Doyle was a doctor, if I'm not wrong, and he was a man of science. So it made sense that a lot of his work was scientific in nature, and it explained the how of everything very carefully. But at the same point in time, I sort of felt that the detective story format was severely limited by the fact that it had a very tight structure which had to be followed to the T, and it sort of got predictable. I could see that all stories had the same structure and the same thing would happen, X, Y, Z, and just what the X was, what the Y was, what the Z was sort of changed. But overall, you know, it didn't make all that much of a difference. So obviously a lot of mystery stuff in my childhood. So we had Secret 7, Famous 5, obviously, Sherlock Holmes. Over on the Bengali side of things, I read a lot of Feluda stories. Translated. My mother was so disappointed that I read the translated versions of these. But I read a lot of Feluda stories as well. And in particular, my favorite Feluda story was The Curse of the Pink Pearl. It's not one of the most popular ones. The reason I liked it is because there was a deliberate authorial intervention that changes the course of the story. It changes how you read it. And there is this The way that the author says, I have written this story and I have made certain decisions that have impacted your experience as a reader. And I thought that was the most fascinating thing about this. Obviously, a lot later in college, when I was studying literature, I would read The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, which was, I think, the peak of how authorial intervention changes the story completely, right? Yeah, I don't really recall reading a lot of Agatha Christie when I was young. How crazy is that? I did read some Poirot, but wait, they're the same. He was not a significant figure in my childhood mystery stories routine. I read all the Agatha Christie I think I read in college, and most of it I disliked. Because of the structure thing. There's nothing against the writer in particular, but I just sort of got bored of the mystery novel as a structural setup. So we'll talk about this more when I do a video about what I read in college. In fact, during school, there were a whole bunch of other things that I thought were super interesting. Obviously, I read Harry Potter when I was a kid, obviously. My favorite Harry Potter book, interestingly, was the fifth one. I don't think anybody really enjoyed the fifth one that much. But it was like the fattest, and I read that one in like 5 days. I remember that as an accomplishment. Also, what I remember from it is that a big chunk of the book was not Harry doing stuff or killing people. It was just him huddled in one place with his family, I think, which was sort of a refreshing take from the rest of the book, where he just has to be out and about. In the fifth one, he's forced to be in one place for a long time. And I thought that was interesting. I liked how descriptive that book was. Yeah. And I think obviously much later I realized how much I like descriptions when I finished reading Vikram Seth's A Suitable Boy in college. Yeah, that is one of the longest novels in the English language, and it's insane. 10 out of 10 recommend. Right, so I read all of the Harry Potter books. I was not as much of a diehard fan of the series as most people have been since the series has ended. There was another one that I enjoyed more. It was Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson books. I loved those. I loved those as a kid because I think I was generally more fascinated by Greek mythology. So all of the Percy Jackson books were my favorite. Yeah, just Camp Half-Blood, and they all... I think the difference between the Percy Jackson world and the Harry Potter world was that Harry Potter was like the chosen one. And in Rick Riordan's world, Percy Jackson, they were all sort of half-blood. It wasn't that, this guy is special or anything. Honestly, I have forgotten what the book was about. But I remember that it was crazy. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, you don't remember stuff from school. How many years ago was this, man? Yeah, close to 20 years ago. Oh my God, I'm so old. Obviously, there was Rick Riordan, and we also had... I never read Artemis Fowl. I think I read Artemis Fowl when it came out as a graphic novel or something. I didn't read Eragon. I can't remember. I did read Elif Shafak for some reason when I was in school. The 40 Rules of Love. Was that school or was that college? I still haven't read Lord of the Rings. Should probably get around to doing that. Or watch the movies for that matter. I also loved reading Vikram Seth when I was in school. He was in our English literature textbooks. And he had like the most phenomenal poems. My God. Just the best poems in the world. So, yeah, I really, really enjoyed reading Vikram Seth. Oh, I also read Khalid Hosseini, A Thousand Splendid Suns. No, wait, there was one before that. Kite Runner. Kite Runner, oh my God, Kite Runner. Oof, yeah, Kite Runner. That was, oh God, okay. Oh, yeah, that was insane. Kite Runner was, oof. What else? There were some other books that I thought were insane. I read some biographies, autobiographies actually. So I started playing guitar when I think I started playing the piano when I was 12 or 13, and I started playing the guitar when I was 14. So I was really interested in the lives of like these really popular musicians that I loved listening to. Slash was one of them. Eric Clapton was another, and I read both their autobiographies. I had to download these books off the internet. They were not available in India at the time. Since then, of course, I am happy to say I actually bought copies of these when they became available. Slash's book was insane. Like I thought I really, really wanted to be Slash at one point. Yeah. Yeah. I am happy to say I have not done nearly as many drugs as he has. Or rather, as he had by the time he was as old as I am. Neither have I worked on an album that is literally the top most selling debut album of all time. Sadly. But he was like a really big influence growing up. And reading his book made so many things clearer. Like, I was so grateful for my context because I grew up in very different conditions. Like, I was not a great student, but I did go to school. I had parents who were attentive. Yeah, and you know, I just generally speaking started to appreciate my world a lot more, having read what he had to go through. At the same point in time, there was this one moment in the book that I found super relatable is when he was, I don't even remember when this happened, but he was in school, I think, at that time, and he went to some girl's apartment because he was interested in her, and instead of doing anything with her, he just spent the whole time listening to music. He just completely forgot that he was interested in the person. That was relatable. That I do remember right now. And what else? I remember how he got his nickname. I remember all the concerts he'd done. I remember that he was very proud of the fact that he hadn't tried cocaine while he was playing guitar. Like, he never did coke while he was playing live. And then he did heroin after. He was like super proud of the fact that he would never do heroin. I remember the hallucinations he had once he did heroin, and I remember how he talked about like the rehab facilities that he went to. So honestly, for like, I must have read this again something around like 20 years ago, and the fact that I still remember all of this is insane. Yeah. He was married to Perla at the time. He's no longer married to her. I remember thinking that they had a great love story. So maybe not the lesson to have taken away from that. Also, he drew the logo for Guns N' Roses himself. And I think that's one of the other inspirations for just, you know, having a primary skill and then just having so many other skills that you just sort of integrate all of them. Somehow, since then, he's sort of branched out into like horror and music and sex sort of combined. That's a very deeply Freudian thing. If I ever do an analysis, it would combine these three things. Slash was crazy. Another thing about Slash's book is that he had a lot of threesomes with Izzy Stradlin. It was very interesting. So Izzy Stradlin was the rhythm guitarist, and by the way, easily the best rhythm guitarist in all of rock music. Yeah, it was just amazing like how he spoke about having threesomes with Izzy Stradlin. Like, it was not a big deal. I would imagine there would be at least a little bit of homophobia there. No, it was just completely, he was like, yeah, we just had like the best threesomes ever. I was like, okay, cool, man. I guess that works. Also, Eric Clapton's autobiography was an important moment for me, because Eric Clapton was like a guitar hero for me, obviously. I think so many people's guitar hero. And he lived an interesting life. I can't recall, like I recall some stuff around him discovering the blues scale and learning how to use it in his solos, but that's not the important part. I remember a couple of things actually from his book. So the first thing I remember is how crazy his love story was with Patti Smith, I think, the person that he wrote Layla for, which is widely considered to be one of the best love stories, or rather one of the best love songs of all time, I think. And that was such a messed up story. Oh God, I think she was already seeing one of the Beatles. I'm forgetting which Beatle it was. Anyway, so she was already seeing somebody, and then he was in the picture, and then there was a lot of confusion. The fact that one of the best songs ever written had circumstances that genuinely made me want to puke is a memory I carry from reading that book. Yes, so that's the first thing I remember from the Eric Clapton autobiography. The second thing is that he tried to give up alcohol many times and he was not able to. And the time that he was finally able to give it up was when I recall the thing he wrote, which was something along the lines of, I fell onto my knees and I surrendered to God, which was an interesting thing to read as an atheist. So I remember that from his book. Then the third thing I remember is he got married to this person that he's still with. She's significantly younger than him, and he wrote Wonderful Tonight for her. I remember that he sort of described the events that inspired the song Wonderful Tonight. And I was thinking this, that Wonderful Tonight is by far the most boring Eric Clapton song that exists. But I was so happy to read that he had reached a place in his life where he did not have to go through this tumultuous sequence of events just to find somebody to love, as had happened with Layla. So that was interesting because it told me that the more stable you get, the more boring your art gets. But yeah, I think Layla is the better song. Wonderful Tonight is the better life circumstance that inspires the song. So my vote is to be as happy as Eric Clapton was when he wrote Wonderful Tonight. But yeah, it's a boring song. Can't help it. Yeah, so just overall, reading Eric Clapton's autobiography really made me realize how different my life was from his, and how even though I want to become a guitar hero, I'm just so much better off not doing that because my life has been fulfilling in other ways. Hi, just finished editing my video. I feel like it's overkill for this kind of format. The editing, color grading, all of that. Also the music, but I am generally a very overkill kind of person, so I don't mind that. I'm not sure if I ramble too much or if the video's too long or it's too short. Honestly, I've been told it's not how long it is, it's how you use it. And it's not so much about the size of the thing as much as it is about the girth. So let me know. Yeah, I had a ton of fun making this, and I realized I didn't get a chance to speak about what I'm reading these days or what's on my to-read list. So I'll just make a brief mention over here. This is the last book I finished reading. Yeah, this is what's called a spicy novel. The first of its kind that I've read. Honestly, it's been so entertaining. It's a little tough to speak about in public, but it's been a lot of fun. I'm glad I got to read it. The book I'm reading right now is this. Very different kind of spice. It's like a throwback to when I was in college. Yeah, so that's it. I do have a little bit more left from the last bit I recorded, so I'll just end with that. Honestly, I don't read as much as I would like to, and I'm hoping that this becomes an excuse for me to do more reading. Yeah, I would have thought that there would be a better way to get myself to read, but it appears shaming myself in public because I don't read enough is the strategy I'm going to go for. Cool. Okay, cool. See you next time. Boom. 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 Boom.